A young man and his girlfriend were avid hikers, and living on the East Coast, one of their ultimate goals, like many hikers on the East Coast, was to hike the entire length of the Appalachian Trail. The Appalachian Trail is a trail, or rather a series of trails that stretches nearly the entire east coast of the United States from Maine in the north all the way to Georgia in the south. Some hikers will hike the entire trail at one time, but this takes months and months and is extremely expensive to do, paying for all the equipment and supplies that you need. So many hikers who want to hike the Appalachian Trail do it in chunks, and they hike different chunks over the course of years, and by the end of it, if you add up all those chunks, they've traveled the entire Appalachian Trail. And that was the case for this man and his girlfriend. They loved hiking the Appalachian Trail together. They had hiked a substantial portion of it already, and now they were just trying to fill in the parts that they had yet to hike. One of those parts was a stretch of trail that goes through southwest Virginia through some pretty rural and remote places. It stretches through 2 national forests, and parts of it are pretty far away from civilization. This is exactly what they were looking for, because they would sometimes feel frustrated when they would go to different parts of the trail and it was just absolutely clogged with people. So it was October and the weather was going to be perfect and the air was going to be crisp but not really cold, and the leaves were going to be starting to change. So they thought it would be a perfect opportunity to go out and hike this part of the trail that they had yet to see. Their planned route would take them about a week to accomplish, and so they gathered all their supplies and they piled in the car and they drove down to this little parking area where you could park and you could leave your car as long as you needed to while you were hiking on the trail. So they set out, and the first day was pretty much perfect. The weather was crisp, but it wasn't cold. The leaves were just starting to change, and it was very scenic and very beautiful. And beyond that, they barely ran into any people on that first day because, as I mentioned, this was a fairly remote stretch of the Appalachian Trail. Afternoon turns to evening on that first day, and they start thinking about setting up camp for the night. Now, different parts of the Appalachian Trail have different rules about where you can and can't camp. On this particular stretch of trail, you were supposed to either camp in one of these permanent shelters that had been constructed along the trail every so often, or you were supposed to camp essentially on the trail or immediately off the trail. However, since one of the reasons they had selected this portion of the trail was because they didn't really want to run into other people, and because they were both expert outdoorsmen, they decided that they would go a little bit off the trail, find somewhere very secluded, and set up camp there. So after a little bit of searching, they find the perfect spot. It was only a few minutes walk off of the trail, and they found this nice small clearing that was flat and seemed perfect for them to set up their camp for the night. And that's exactly what they did. They set up their tent, they gathered firewood, they started a fire, they cooked some dinner, and then they decided that they would turn in early because they knew they had a very long trip ahead of them and they didn't want to stay up too late. And so he drifts off to sleep until about 2 o'clock in the morning. And at 2 in the morning, he feels a hand on his shoulder and start to shake him. And he opens his eyes, and his girlfriend was shaking his shoulder and looking extremely concerned. And before he could ask her what's wrong, she says to him, "There's somebody in our camp." And he's trying to whisper as well because he's understanding that this is a scary situation. He says, "What are you talking about?" And she says, "I keep hearing somebody walking around our camp. A minute ago, they were walking around our tent, and I heard what sounded like somebody taking a knife and kind of sliding it across our tent." Now, this young man was aware that very rarely bad things do happen on the Appalachian Trail, but they do happen. And so whenever he was going out on one of these extended hikes, he would always bring weapons with him. And in this instance, he had 2 handguns. And he figured, if worse comes to worse, one of those I can use for myself, and one of those I can give to my girlfriend so she can protect herself as well. So his girlfriend says to him, "You need to get your gun and go check what's going on out there." So he says, okay. He doesn't really want to go out there because he's obviously frightened, but as quietly as he can, he opens up his pack and he grabs one of the handguns and he grabs his flashlight. He had this extremely powerful flashlight that would light up the entire area once he turned it on. And he doesn't want to go out quite yet. He wants to have a better sense of what the situation is, one, and two, he wants to also make sure that this is a person out there and it's not an animal that his girlfriend is hearing. And so with his handgun in one hand and his flashlight in the other hand, they are sitting there silently, just sort of staring at each other and listening out into the woods. And for a minute, he doesn't hear anything. And for a minute, he's starting to think, well, maybe my girlfriend was imagining this. Maybe she was just very tired. But soon enough, he hears it. He hears the sound of branches crunching and leaves crunching, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. And he had spent enough time in the woods to know the difference between animal footsteps and human footsteps. If you have a two-legged being, such as a human, their footsteps are going to sound somewhat different than, say, a deer or a bear or a raccoon or something like this that's just scurrying around in the brush. And so he comes to the realization that, yes, there is, in fact, somebody in our camp. And so even though he's very scared, he knows that he's going to go out and confront this person. So as carefully as he can and as quietly as he can, he starts to unzip the tent, almost silently, and very carefully crawls out of the tent onto the ground. Now the sounds were coming from the back of the tent, and now he's in the front of the tent. So he's thinking to himself, okay, I'm out of the tent now, but they can't see that I just got out, because between me and them is the tent. And so he's getting ready to light up this area, but he wants to take whoever this is by surprise. He doesn't want to give them a chance to ambush him, and he wants to make sure that he sees them and doesn't give them a chance to run away before he confronts them. So again, there's silence. He doesn't hear any footsteps. He crouches in front of the tent just for another minute or so, and then again, he hears footsteps in the brush just behind the tent. And very quickly, very suddenly, he pops out from around the corner and he lights up the area with his flashlight. And just as he's lighting up the area, he sees what he thinks is the body of a person dashing behind a tree. Now, it all happened extremely quick. And he was still very groggy from being woken up so suddenly, and he's still feeling a little bit disoriented. So he's not absolutely certain of what he saw. But he believes that he saw a person dash behind this tree and is now hiding back there. And so he screams out to this person who he believes is out there as scary and authoritative as he can manage to sound. And he says, I'm armed, you need to get out of here. There's no response. So he's thinking, okay, maybe I'm scaring this guy, maybe he didn't realize that I was armed, but I want to make sure this guy gets away from our tent. And so very slowly, very carefully, he starts walking toward this tree, maybe 15, 20 meters behind the tent. As he's about halfway to this tree, he hears off to his right, very suddenly, the sound of more footsteps crunching through the leaves and running off into the woods. And when he hears this, he wheels around and points his flashlight up over into that area to try to see whatever's going on over there. But as soon as he wheels around to look over to this new sound, he hears footsteps from the original position behind this tree darting off into the woods. He thinks for a second that he should go and chase down whoever this is, but he realizes that would be a terrible idea. I don't know these woods. I don't know who these people are. Even though I'm armed, they could be armed as well. I think the best thing to do is to just stay here and defend our camp. And so he goes back to the tent and he tells his girlfriend about what happened, how it seems like there were actually two people out there, but hopefully I've scared them off. Hopefully they're gone now and they're not coming back. They talk briefly about what they should do, and they decide that, it's the middle of the night. There's really not much we can do. I'm just going to stand guard at the front of the tent until the sun comes up. It's like 4 or 5 hours from now, but that's fine. I don't think I would be able to get back to sleep even if I tried. So I'm going to take my flashlight, I'm going to take my weapon, I'm going to sit in front of the tent and just cross my fingers that whoever these people are, I scared them off, they saw that I had a weapon, and now they're not going to come back. And that's exactly what he did. For the next 4 or 5 hours, he just sits right there in front of the tent until the sun starts coming up, and he never hears any other strange sounds throughout the course of the night. The next morning, they talk about what they should do, and they consider for a moment just abandoning their plans and going back to the car. But they decide, whoever this was, let's just try to put as much distance as we can between ourselves and them. Today, let's just continue along our planned route. Let's just go as far as we can, and I'm sure these people aren't going to follow us. It's probably just some locals. Maybe we were getting too close to their land. Maybe they were just checking us out. It's unlikely. If we can get far away from these people, I don't think they're going to bother us again. And so that day, they're hiking top speed. They're hiking really as fast as they can, just to try to get down the trail and put some distance between this original campsite and wherever they're going to get by the end of the day. And that entire day, they don't see any other souls. They don't run into any other hikers, and they have no sign of being followed. The young man constantly throughout the course of the day is looking over his shoulder and half expecting to see some weirdos out in the tree line keeping an eye on them, but they never see anything like that. Although the young man says that the entire day he just felt like he was being watched, and he couldn't account for it. There was no reason for him to feel that way, and so he just chalks it up to being paranoid because he had a very scary experience the night before. It starts to get late in the day, and so they decide that it's time to start looking for a new campsite. And they both decide wherever we camp, it needs to be somewhere that is very secure, very out of the way. We don't want anybody finding us like we did the night before. And they're able to find this spot that to them feels like it would be the perfect spot to set up a little hidden camp. They find this small cliff face, and at the bottom of the cliff face there's a little bit of an overhang, giving them just enough space to set up their tent underneath this overhang. So it would be incredibly hard for anybody to spot their tent unless they know exactly where to look. It would be essentially impossible to spot them from the trail. So they set up their tent and they try to enjoy some dinner as best as they can, although they're both still feeling very stressed and they're both feeling very paranoid that somebody out there is watching us. So the young man says to his girlfriend, you go to sleep. I'm going to do my best to stay up and keep guard, but I barely slept last night. We hiked a really long way today. There's a chance that, just realistically, there's a chance that I'm going to fall asleep at some point, but I'm going to keep my flashlight out. I'm going to keep my weapon out just in case we run into an emergency situation. And he stays up as best as he can, but at some point in the night, he falls asleep. And again, this second night, around 2 o'clock in the morning, he's awoken. And he's awoken by the sound of what to him sounds like somebody rummaging around in their campsite. And so he listens for a moment just to make sure that he's hearing what he believes he's hearing, which he is. It sounds like somebody's going through all of their stuff quite aggressively. And so he very gently shakes his girlfriend awake and puts his finger to his lips, telling her, don't make any noise. But there's somebody in our campsite right now. And so for just a moment, they just look at each other and they just listen. And they're thinking about what to do and kind of trying to communicate without even saying any words. And the young man in one hand grabs his flashlight, and the other hand he grabs his handgun. And once again, as loud and as authoritative as he can possibly sound, he screams out into the darkness, "I'm armed, you need to get out of here." And when he screams that, he hears the sound of whoever this is dropping what they're doing and scurrying off into the woods. So he's feeling good that, okay, they're leaving, but I need to make sure that they're gone. I need to go out there and I need to make sure that they're not once again hiding behind a tree out in our campsite. So he takes his flashlight, he takes his handgun, and he starts making his way out to the edge of the campsite where he heard these footsteps going. And he knows that he doesn't want to go too far from the camp. He wants to stay as close as he can, but he still needs to explore a little bit and make sure that this person has indeed left the campsite. And so he only goes a little ways down this little hill to the edge of the campsite, and he finds this little creek that's running maybe 30-40 meters from the campsite. So he stops at the creek and he looks down the creek, and he sees a light down the creek. And he's kind of squinting at it, and he realizes that this looks like a light from a lantern, like a typical lantern that somebody would take camping with them. And he's staring at the lantern, and as he's staring at the lantern, he sees very suddenly 3 more lights pop up. 3 more lanterns. And he realizes that this was not 1 or 2 people that have been following them. This is a whole team of people that for 2 days now have been tracking him and his girlfriend through the woods and coming into their campsite at night, even though they know that he's armed. And he suddenly feels extremely afraid. He full-on sprints back to the campsite. He gets in the tent and he says to his girlfriend very bluntly, "We're leaving. Let's pick up whatever of our stuff we can carry, whatever we can't carry, whatever we can't pack in the next 2 minutes, we're going to leave it. We're leaving the tent, anything else, we're getting out of here. I don't care if it's the middle of the night, we have to get out of here right now." It's not 1 or 2 people, there's a whole team of people out there that have been tracking us for 2 days. And so as quickly as they can, they grab the supplies that are essential for them to get out of the woods, and they just book it. They hike through the rest of the night, the entire rest of the next day, and into the next night, so that they can make it back to their car and get the heck out of there, because they were not going to make camp even 1 more time in these woods and risk a 3rd encounter with whoever these people are. And the entire time that they're working to get out of the woods, both him and his girlfriend have that same feeling, that they're being watched and they're being tracked. And this time they know that it's not just paranoia, that these people, whoever they are still watching them and still following them out of the woods. The young man has no clue who these people are. He kind of hopes that it's just a group of desperate thieves who were trying to get whatever supplies they could get to resell them and make some money, but something about the situation was so strange and so bizarre that he knows in his heart that these were not just ordinary run-of-the-mill thieves. That whoever these people were, they were up to something much creepier than just stealing some equipment. Thank you so much for watching. Apologies for the lack of uploads recently, but my job has gotten pretty brutal with how many hours I have to work. But I marched in there and I said no more. I am not working 1 more hour until I record my spooky videos. And they say, okay, we understand. So now I've made clear to my employer what my priorities are. None of that happened, but I am going to try to record when I'm able. So if you like spooky stories that are told to you by a very awkward man in his 30s, then you're going to love my channel. So why don't you like and subscribe and stick around for the next one? Because it's going to be good.